Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to this week's Diverse Minds podcast. And this week, we're going to be talking all about the festival of Diwali. And if you don't know what that is, then fear not, as this week's guest is going to tell you all about it. I am joined by the extremely qualified Dr. Manish Tayal, MBE, Surgeon Commander in the British Royal Navy. Dr. Manish Tayal, MBE, joined the Royal Navy in 2004 following medical training in St Andrews in Manchester and fresh from NHS practice in South Fife. He's a proud Mancunian now living in Winchester with his wife and son. Manish is responsible for healthcare governance and delivery of primary and pre-hospital emergency care in the maritime operational environment. He also continues to practice clinically in Worthy Down, home of the Defence College of Logistics, Policing and Administration, and also mentors junior medical personnel. He's passionate about diversity and inclusion. Manish developed and implemented inclusive leadership training for operational sea training and the UK Maritime Component Command. He speaks regularly on the subject, both within Defence and externally. And there are more accolades because he sits on the South West Wales and London Police Ethics Board and the London Police Challenge Forum, and is currently involved in developing the Naval Service Ethics Programme. And to top all of that professional practice, he also established the Defence Hindu Network, and we were there too, a project that seeks to explore, commemorate and share Indian experiences of the First World War, something that I'm very passionate about too. And he's a member of the internal challenge group for Project Libra, focused on improving Royal Navy engagement with British ethnic minority communities. For his work on race, faith and inclusion in defence, he was awarded an MBE in 2018 New Year's Honours List. Bringing together his operational, clinical and diversity and inclusion interests, Manish also supports service personnel who are experiencing mental ill health themselves or caring for family members with mental health issues. And he sits on an advisory panel for a national campaign to raise awareness and access and improve outcomes for those with mental health problems in British Asian communities, something that we talked about this month in episode 8. He draws strength and solace from religion, particularly his own Hindu faith, and is most at peace when immersed in dance, whether that's dancing himself or watching others perform. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me today, and a huge warm welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Leila, and thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here and to speak with you.
No, I'm absolutely delighted because there's so much in your bio that we could talk about, and I think we're going to struggle to fit it all in, but we'll have a good go. So as we're going to be focusing primarily on Diwali, but I do want to pick up on the other elements around your work. For those listeners who might not know, can you tell our listeners about Diwali and what it is and what it means?
You mean other than parties, dancing, great food and fireworks?
Yes, the traditional sense of how Indians party, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, sure. So that's actually a really interesting and really relevant question for us in the Royal Navy, actually, and the wider armed forces. So Diwali, absolute basics. It's the night that Lord Ram returned home after exile in the forest for 14 years, and after defeating the evil King Ravan. I mean, that's the sort of story of Diwali. But it's often said that Diwali represents the triumph of good over evil and of light over darkness, and that of course is true. But Ram's victory over Ravan is celebrated at Vijayadashmi or Dussehra, which is a couple of weeks before Diwali. Some are in fact celebrating it today, and others are celebrating it tomorrow. So that victory isn't what Diwali is about. So what is Diwali itself about? So, as I say, Ram with his wife Sita and his brother Lakshman, they spent many long years away from home. During that time, they undertook development, social reform and humanitarian work in tribal communities. They assisted the poor and vulnerable, and they protected the people of their own kingdom, allied kingdoms, and indeed Lanka itself by defeating the evil King Ravan. After all of that, Ram, along with his great army that he'd built up, finally returned home to Ayodhya, his own kingdom, where family, friends, and the whole kingdom celebrated their safe return and welcomed them home with open arms and love in their hearts. And that's something that every Royal Navy family can absolutely relate to. The safe return of a sailor after a long deployment back to their loving family and friends. Because, as everyone in the Royal Navy knows, after all the adventures at sea, the runs ashore, protecting the nation's interests around the world, whether providing humanitarian assistance to disaster-stricken communities, maintaining the rule of international law, defending vital trade routes, after all of that, family are the light in our lives. So for Royal Navy sailors and families, that return and coming back together, that's the real victory of light over darkness. And that, for me, is what Diwali is about.
That's so powerful, because I think people wouldn't really necessarily make that connection. So people might think about mithai or sweetmeats. They might think about people wearing beautiful clothes, the lights, the parties. But making those two connections, I think that's very, very that's very poignant and that's very powerful. And clearly that's obviously driven the work that you do in regards to Diwali and the Royal Navy.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, when you go further into that story, then you can see where all of that comes from. It was a dark night as they returned home. So the people of Ayodhya lit loads of lights and burst fireworks and so on to light their way home and to celebrate. And, how do we celebrate as people around the world? We dance, we eat great food, all of that. So all of it comes out of it. But at its core, it's about family and it's about community.
And so, I think a lot of people, and I was saying to Manish before we started recording that I struggle to understand the kind of enormity of the defence forces in this country. And we're quite a small country, but actually our defence culture is very well established. So how have you created an open and inclusive culture? How have you been part of that process for Diwali to be celebrated in the Royal Navy?
Yeah, so, I hear a lot when people are discussing, you talk about an inclusive culture, when people are discussing inclusion, a comment that I hear so often, whether it's in defence or elsewhere, is, we don't care what religion you are, your race, your sexuality, and so on. We just care that you can do your job and do it really well. But for me, that kind of misses the point. We do need to care about people's sex, race, religion, sexuality, and anything else that makes them who they are, because, we want people to bring and contribute all that makes them who they are to make the team better. So I think the first thing is exactly that. You need to care. But then how does that work actually in practice? Well, the key, of course, is dialogue, talking to each other, having open, honest conversations. And in that, we need to be aware of ourselves and our own perspectives and biases, and we need to cultivate a curiosity and a keenness to learn. From a Hindu perspective, you may have heard that there's a verse from the Vedas that says, "Ano badara kritaboyam tu vishvata," means may noble thoughts come to us from all sides. Now, that doesn't mean that everything we come across is true, right, relevant, useful, but it does mean that we should remain open to learning from everyone and everything around us. And of course, in those conversations, sometimes you'll get it wrong, right? And you may even cause offense. But that's got to be okay as well, because being offended doesn't make you right, and offending somebody doesn't necessarily make you wrong. But what that does do is it offers an opportunity for both parties to learn from each other, right? So if I'm offended because you've said something that offends me, then, well, that's an opportunity for me to think, well, why is it that I'm offended? What is it about that offends me? And I can have that conversation with you and say, you've said this, and this is what I've understood from it, and this is why it offends me. And we can have that conversation. So going back to the story of Diwali, right? When Ram finally defeated Ravan, and Ravan was lying on the ground dying, Ram instructed his brother Lakshman to go over to Ravan, pay his respects to him, and learn from him, because he was, for all his evil, He was a powerful, experienced, learned, and accomplished scholar and king. So again, that lesson resonates for us in the Royal Navy because we absolutely recognise that, you know what, even in the heat of battle, our enemies too are human and worthy of respect. And respect for others is one of the core values that all of us in the Royal Navy live by.
Wow. I think that's so beautifully put. And I'm so pleased you said what you did around, people say we don't care what colour you are, we don't care if you've got a disability, we just care about your competency. But of course, if there are barriers for people to being able to show their talents because of the way a system is set up, then they're not going to be welcome in the workplace because people don't necessarily see their talents. So you're absolutely right that we've got to think about that, and also just reflecting on the kind of political climate that we have now and around being offended and how you're offending. And I think you're right. I think the key thing there is how to create an environment where people can have open dialogues, and when they feel frustrated or upset or offended, they can have an open conversation without someone not feeling defensive.
Yeah, exactly that. And there's so Diwali is, as well as all we've said, it's also considered by most Hindus as the Hindu New Year, right? So because it's the New Year, one of the things that we do at Diwali is we worship Lord Ganesh, who those of your listeners who aren't familiar, Ganesh, they might recognize as the one with the elephant head. One of the symbolisms of Ganesh, as well as his role in removing obstacles from our path, which is why we worship him at the New Year. One of the things about Ganesh is obviously this elephant head. He's got these huge flapping ears, right? Mm-hmm. And he's got this small elephant mouth. And the whole point of that is, you know what, listen more than you speak. Because if you're talking, you're not learning, right? You're only learning while you're listening. So it's all about the importance of genuinely listening to each other and hearing what each other are saying.
And how have you? I didn't realize that about Ganesh, about the ears and the mouth. Yeah, and the adage that I say in training, which is you've got two ears to one mouth for a reason, but it's the same, isn't it? So how? What? Sorry, Manish.
No, exactly that. Yeah, I completely agree.
So what kinds of things do you do then in the Royal Navy to celebrate Diwali? And part of the story there you might like to talk about the Defence Hindu Network as well?
Yeah, sure. So the Defence Hindu Network, so it started off as the Armed Forces Hindu Network, and we launched it in 2014 at Diwali, as it happens. So our launch event was a Diwali event at the Ministry of Defence in Whitehall. Mm-hmm. So like I say, it was the Armed Forces Hindu Network. It's now become the Defence Hindu Network. And it was established to do three main things. Firstly, to support the chain of command and enhance operational effectiveness. Because of course, there is a requirement to advise on, well, what does it mean if you as the command have got Hindu personnel in your unit? What does that mean? And how can you best support them? Because supported people work better and are happier. Secondly, therefore, it's also a support network for the almost 3,000 Hindus across Defence, as well as veterans and families. So quite a sizable Defence Hindu community. And finally, in order to maximise operational effectiveness, as I said, and in order to support our people, we need the support of British Hindu communities. So therefore, the final purpose of the network is to bring together the armed forces or the whole of defence with British Hindu communities in the spirit of mutual support and shared values. So we've got a network of Hindus and supporters across defence, serving personnel, veterans, civil servants, families, and so on, guided by the Armed Forces Hindu chaplain. And we can offer advice, support, and representation. And we also host and attend events around the country. So, for example, each year we take a group of Hindus from defence around the country to celebrate Raksha Bandhan with communities across the country. We also celebrate Diwali. So each year we'll hold a Diwali celebration, and that'll be within an armed forces establishment. So for example, HMS President in London has hosted a Diwali event there. We hosted one at the Navy Command headquarters in Portsmouth, where I'm speaking from today. And we've also held these events in army establishments. So, for example, the London Scottish Company hosted one. RAF Northolt has hosted one as well. So we celebrate Diwali in lots of different places, and we deliberately set it up so that at Diwali we host it in an armed forces establishment, and we invite the community in, so that Hindu communities who attend it get to see, feel, immerse themselves, and understand what exactly is defence, who are the armed forces, what do we do, and we come together in that way, so that, you know, as I said before, it's about family, it's about communities. And so that's kind of the spirit that we try to imbibe with it.
And are these events open? So if people want to know more about Diwali, would they also be open to non-Hindus?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we celebrate Diwali, then we have an internal form of communications called DINs, which are Defence Internal Notices. They go out to the whole of Defence, and basically we put it on the DIN, send that out, and, you know, everyone's invited to attend. And the good thing about that is that they get to know a bit about what Diwali is about, a bit about what the Defence Hindu community is about, but also about what the wider British Hindu communities are about, because they are there as well, and they share in it. So it really is just to bring everyone together.
Oh, that's brilliant. And do you find that people are quite receptive? So non-Hindus, are they quite receptive to finding out more, to coming along? Have you seen an increase in non-Hindus attending?
Yeah, very much so. So, you know, so there's it's been really warmly taken up, especially at the senior levels, but it's also trickled down over the years, so that, you know, yes, we get senior officers attending, but we're also getting, you know, commanding officers of individual units attending, seniors from individual units, so, you know, warrant officers and regimental sergeant majors and so on, and then normal soldiers, sailors, and airmen are attending as well. And hopefully, it's not just for the food, but you know,
we can be hopeful.
Exactly. You know, I think everyone does tend to leave it saying that, you know, that they've learned something, they've understood something a little better, and also, as I say, you know, understanding goes two ways, doesn't it? So.
Yeah.
So we're really keen on them coming because it gives our invited guests from Hindu communities that opportunity to understand the wide breadth and diversity that is in defence as well, which can sometimes come as a surprise to them.
Yeah, well, like it came as a surprise to me. So that's an example, isn't it? We've just had a short conversation, but a lot of the things you've said to me have really surprised me. So that's fantastic. And actually, I would have thought it's quite a difficult thing to do in the defence forces. So if you think about extrapolating it out, and when you worked in the NHS and thinking about other workplaces, how do you think all workplaces could embrace and celebrate Diwali so it goes beyond tokenistic tick boxing and really goes more towards what you're talking about, which is the inclusive dialogue, understanding, and strategic and operational facet?
Sure. So, I mean, you know, I've spoken about how poignant Diwali is for us in the Royal Navy and in the wider armed forces. But actually, you know what, Diwali is relevant to all of us. There's really important messages in the Diwali festival that we can all relate to. So, for example, Diwali, as I said, marks the new year for Hindus. So it's the time when we close one year's accounts and open the accounts for the coming year, and we pray to Goddess Lakshmi to bless us with prosperity and success. So, it's really, really pertinent to people in financial industries and in the city and so on. It's a time when we pray for the light of knowledge, represented by Ram, and Sita, to dispel the darkness of ignorance, represented by Ravan. So we worship Saraswati to grant us learning and wisdom. So it's really relevant to those education and so on. So, I could go on. There's something within the Diwali festival that you can take that is specifically relevant and speaks to whichever sector you're in. And of course, then there's universally relevant traditions and customs around Diwali. So, have everyone bring in sweets or cakes, or even bring and share lunch, or maybe have, at Diwali, as you'll know, you clean your house, right? And you throw out all the old things, and you buy some new kitchenware and that kind of stuff. So maybe have an office cleanup, right, where everyone spends the day clearing out their desk drawers, office cabinets, all that, cleans the place up. Maybe take the opportunity to replace some old office furniture, stationery and equipment and stuff with new things. So there's lots of ways that Diwali and its customs and traditions can be celebrated in the workplace by everyone that are completely secular and inclusive and can speak to people of all faiths and none. Because I think celebrations are most effective and meaningful if there's a message that's relevant to you. And workplaces and non-Hindu colleagues can then understand that there's something in this for all of them. And then you can shape your celebrations around that and actually make it meaningful. And that, of course, goes to the very heart of diversity and inclusion, because the point of that is that by taking the best from all of us, from all of our differing perspectives, the whole is made so much better. I think the other thing to say is, and this is slightly a personal issue, I suppose, is that it's really important to have a sensible, pragmatic, flexible leave policy that allows those celebrating to take annual leave if they wish to celebrate with their family and friends, because, like I said, that's what Diwali is about. So if you can't celebrate with your family, then that's going to impact on your enjoyment of the festival. And of course, that's particularly relevant for armed forces personnel who may be deployed. Obviously, if you're deployed, then it's quite difficult to get you back for Diwali. But even when you're not deployed, many of them work away from home. Now, this year, Diwali is on Sunday, 27th of October. So there may well be those who want to take the Monday off to enjoy the festival with their families on Sunday night, and then, recover the next morning. So unless there's good operational reasons not to let people take their leave at that time, well, they should be supported in doing so. And armed forces policy is exactly that, unless there's good operational reasons not to let people take their leave at religious festival time or whenever they'd wish to do so, they should be and are supported in doing that. From my own experience, a particularly memorable workplace Diwali celebration was actually my very first in the Royal Navy. So I'd only been in the Royal Navy for a couple of months, and I was going through initial officer training at the Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. In that training phase, you're not allowed out of the college even at weekends because you're training all the time. So I wasn't going to be able to celebrate Diwali with my family and friends. So, I asked for special dispensation, but was rightly, I was refused. So obviously I was upset, but I carried on and I understood the rationale. So on Diwali day itself, coming back from an exercise, I walked into my cabin and my whole division were in there and they all yelled out Happy Diwali. The whole cabin was draped in orange. There were rows of tea lights everywhere. There was samosas, bhajias, and drinks and stuff on the table. There was Indian music playing from a laptop in the corner. So basically, my division, they'd gone online, they'd researched Diwali, they'd got our instructors to buy the stuff they needed, and they'd thrown me a surprise Diwali party, which is probably the college's first ever Diwali celebration. So as I said, a sensible leave policy. I didn't get leave, but only because there were good reasons I couldn't. And then a celebration that really does involve everyone.
That is so lovely. That's made me quite emotional, actually. That's absolutely beautiful that they did that. And it goes to show, so they weren't experts. And I
It
think,
made me quite emotional as
yeah,
well.
yeah, absolutely. And even though they weren't experts, it just goes to show in this age of information, it's not difficult, is it, to make someone's day or to make them feel acknowledged or recognised. And absolutely, they got it spot on. But yeah, so I think often people feel very fearful. I have to be an expert. I have to be an expert. But actually, they didn't, and they did it right. So I think that's powerful on so many levels.
Well, definitely. And I'll add in there without giving away my age. This was back in 2004. Information has moved on. We know much more. So it's even easier now.
Yeah. Yeah, and also the fact that you took it in your stride, I think, because I can imagine how challenging and difficult that was. But the fact that you just said, well, I understood it, and even on reflection, I think it was the right decision that they didn't give me leave. But it goes back to your point about that communication and acknowledging rights and responsibilities, using the processes, accepting the answer, still having that positive dialogue, and actually your colleagues trusting you and respecting you to do that.
Exactly that, and so we, it also goes along with, there's a principle in the armed forces which I think, it's easy to understand why we have the principle, which is, if you're given a lawful order, you follow it, even if you don't agree with it. If you're given a lawful order, you follow it, and then later on you can question why and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, at the time, lawful order, follow it. If you have doubts or if you want to discuss it with your command, yes, you can do that, but do that later on.
And I think that's the difference, isn't it? So if it can be done in, the Royal Navy, which is command and control, and like you said, it has to be for many reasons, because it is a life or death situation a lot of the time, especially, if it's in battle, as it were. Other workplaces can be more flexible. So I think if you can do it, I don't think there's an excuse for many workplaces not to do it or not to acknowledge it. And I really love the tips that you gave around how can you relate it to everyday activities or offices. So you gave the example about the city, end of the financial year, you can link it to that. You can link it to cleaning and tidying the office and buying stationery, and also bringing in sweet treats and having a discussion. And again, that just opens up the playing field. So there's so many things there. Thank you. So I don't think anyone's got any excuses now. I think that's so helpful. And I just wanted to pick up as well, because you mentioned it before, about your outreach work with BME communities to raise awareness of the Royal Navy. Are you happy to just tell our listeners a little bit more about this, what you do, how it works, and why it's so important to you?
I mean, firstly, I think it's really important that the civilian communities that we serve understand who we are, what we do, and how, in their name and on their behalf. Civilians and defence personnel, because of what we do and the nature of what we do, share quite a unique bond, but one that's not often understood. And equally, and for the same reasons, I think it's really important for defence to understand the communities that we serve. So our engagement with civilian communities, including BAME communities, I hate that term, but let's
we all do, actually.
Now.
Yeah, I've started saying global majority, so if you want to use that, feel free. I think my listeners are used to me saying global majority.
Sure. But the engagement with all communities is firstly about improving our mutual understanding of who each other are and what we're all about. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, look, I'm not a recruiter, but I do think that it's important not only for British institutions to reflect the society and communities that they serve, but also to access the very best talent. But when you talk about diversity and inclusion and so on, a issue that's raised so often is, you know what, I don't want you to hire people because they're brown or black or female or LGBT, or I want you to get the best person. But that's the whole point, isn't it? If we're not engaging with ethnic minority or global majority, or however you want to phrase it, communities, because we're sticking to the recruiting pools and the communities that we're used to, well, that's a huge talent pool that we're missing out on. So how are we going to get the best people if we're not even looking at half the population in the case of, for example, females? So, and equally, if, this is going to sound slightly arrogant, but the armed forces and indeed the MOD civil service offer some incredible career and indeed life opportunities. So why should BAME communities miss out on those just because they don't know about them?
Yeah.
Now, I grew up in an Asian community in central Manchester, right? Nobody I knew had any military background. So without these kinds of outreach activities, I'd have missed out on the last 15 years worth of amazing experiences in the Royal Navy. So it's not all about recruitment, and I make it very clear I'm not a recruiter. But I think it is important that we both get out into all communities and invite them into our home as well to break down those barriers and increase awareness on both sides. So that's why we organise the events that we organise the way that we do, which is either we'll go out and so, for example, at Raksha Bandhan each year, we'll go and celebrate Raksha Bandhan at mandirs up and down the country. And we do a week-long tour where we do that. And at Diwali, as I said earlier, we invite community into our home so that we can bring people together and break down barriers and increase that awareness.
And how do you find, and that's brilliant, and how do you find the work that you've done around raising awareness around the Indian contribution in World War One helps with the We Were There Too project, helps with the work that you do in Mondays? Yeah, I'd love to know the link there, and do you get more buy-in as a result, just civilian understanding?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an interesting one, and it has quite a lot of different facets to it, and it takes conversations, as you can imagine, off in a variety of different directions. So the responses that you get when you talk to people about, 1.5 million Indians fought in the First World War, including 750,000 Hindus, and you talk to them about the fact that actually the trenches of the trenches of Western Europe, in the First World War, were actually in many ways a lot more diverse than perhaps the armed forces are today, and reflected today's UK population in some ways better than we are today. So something along the line has gone wrong. And so you can start discussing why that is and what that's all about. And I think some of that is, on both sides. So yes, okay, there's work that defence can do and is doing, and I think it's doing it really well to reach out to underrepresented communities. But equally, what about those communities? So there was a survey done by what's it called? The BBC Asian Network in 2006, which, amongst loads of other stuff, it asked a huge group of both Asians and non-Asians whether they'd consider a career in the armed forces. And the biggest positive response to that was from British Hindus. So 56% of British Hindus, young British Hindus who responded in that survey, said that they'd consider a career in the British Armed Forces. That's higher than any other community in Britain, including white British. But that doesn't then translate into actual Hindu personnel joining up. So somewhere there's a disconnect. But when you start talking to people about, this is not something new. Hindus have been serving in the British Armed Forces and serving UK defence for a long, long time, And so you talk to them about what we did in the First World War, and you talk about the fact that, we when I say we, Indians earned this many Victoria Crosses in the First and Second World Wars, and they fought in these places, and all of that. Suddenly, people think, "Oh wow, that's my heritage," and we talk about role models, don't we? Well, suddenly here's a whole load. Here's 1.5 million role models for you. So I think it does open eyes in that sense. But at the same time, like I say, it raises questions as well. So 1.5 million Indians fought in the First World War. Well, what does that mean for me as an Indian today in Britain? Does that mean that actually there's a heritage and a shared history that I can get behind and be part of? And hopefully it does, or at the very least, it makes people interested in understanding, well, what does it mean to be in the armed forces as an Indian, as a Hindu, as a Muslim, as a Sikh? What did it mean then? What does it mean today? And like I say, it's about awareness and understanding and breaking down the barriers.
And I think, obviously we've been dedicating October to Black History Month, and I think that fits in with the wider agenda around Black history, how we recall it, how we remember it, and what those real stories are. And last year I went to see Akram Khan's last performance, which was in conjunction with the 1918 Foundation. Yes, and I was going to ask you, did you manage to see it? It was so moving. It was hard to watch. Yeah, it was hard to watch, but I wondered if you'd seen it and what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few of those actually. Another one was The Troth by Academy, which was also an incredible production. The arts and defence have a long history. We're all familiar with war poets from the First World War. Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon and so on. The arts speak to us all, don't they? And so I think it's an incredibly powerful way of getting some of the both the highs and the lows, because there are both, from defence and defence activity. It impacts on everything, doesn't it? We tend to think of the military as out there fighting battles and wars and things, but actually service personnel are just normal people with families and home lives and all the rest of it, and the same stresses as everyone else. So, but all of that impacts on that. So I think it's really powerful to showcase all of that in accessible ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about defence, and we often think about, because this show is all about mental health and inclusion, and the work that you do with service personnel who might be experiencing mental ill health, and also raising awareness in South Asian communities in mental health. I'd love it if you could just tell us before we finish today, more about that and what you do, how you support people, and why this is important to you.
Yeah. So I guess there's two parts to that. So there's the pure mental health part of it, which I'll come back to. But because we're talking about Diwali and faith in the workplace, there was an interesting piece in The Atlantic recently on the fact that students at a highly regarded US university are either unable or unwilling to discuss religion in the classroom. And I think lots of us can relate to. I've certainly always had problems answering the question, "Are you religious?" We're so conditioned, aren't we, to avoid talk of religion and politics that it's immediately taboo to express that part of yourself in a professional setting.
Yeah, definitely.
Despite the fact that for many people, it's a really important driving, motivating and guiding force in their lives. So it's really important. But we don't want to come across as, a religious fanatic or a Bible basher or a backwards superstitious idiot or, all the tropes. So it can feel really threatening to admit, so to speak, being a person of faith.
Yeah. Which
means that we feel pressured, or we can feel pressured to suppress that side of us. So that then progresses to other things. So as an example, recently, a discussion in the workplace on yoga,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a friend commented that, yeah, yoga's not for me. I can't stand all that superstitious spiritual mumbo jumbo. Now, and went on to say that's why I prefer Pilates instead. Now, as a Hindu, for whom yoga is the foundation of my religion,
Mm-hmm.
that can be fairly hurtful.
Mm.
But I don't want to say anything, right? Because in a public forum, you don't want to start getting into that kind of argument, and you feel a little bit silly because and so it can feel like religion's the one thing that you cannot express openly. So that can be really damaging to your own sense of self, sense of belonging, and your own mental health. So it's really important that we need to look at how we can remove that taboo and stigma that can exist around faith in the workplace, so that we can feel comfortable being ourselves, and perhaps even learn something from each other. So I think that's really important in terms of the impact of all that we've been discussing on mental health. Did you want me to talk about mental health itself?
Well, I guess, yeah, and the work that you do with service personnel. So, what do you do, and what support is available? And again, people might not know what the defence, what the Royal Navy do in this area.
Sure. So, I mean, for service personnel, as I said before, service personnel are people, right? So, like all people, we all have lots of stresses in our lives, and we all have, a finite possible probability that we are going to suffer a mental illness in our lives. And the other thing that, fortunately, I'm glad to see is increasingly being understood is that we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health, right? So, so it's really important that we need to promote positive, good mental health, and B, then prevent, detect, and treat mental ill health. So for me as a GP in the Royal Navy, obviously it's really important to me. And there is a whole medical chain to support. So we've got GPs in the Royal Navy, just as we would in the NHS for civilians. We've got a Department of Community Mental Health, which echoes the community mental health services in the NHS. So we've got that whole medical chain. But mental health and even mental ill health is not just a function of medicine and medics, right? So looking after our people is, we describe it in the Royal Navy as a whole ship responsibility, right? Everyone has a part to play. So it's important that all of our people are well equipped to look after both themselves and their colleagues. And it's also a function of good leadership, right? Because, the Royal Navy is a hierarchical, disciplined organization. As a leader in any organization, but particularly so in that kind of situation, it's really important to understand and know your people. What is keeping them up at night? What are they worrying about? Or what is it that makes them happy? So it's an important function of just generally good leadership. So talking about those kinds of issues, whether informally or at tailored events or on more general courses where we insert these issues, or offering advice and signposting when it's needed, all of that is really important and helpful.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's such a proactive way to manage it. So we're not, like you said, it's not just the job of medics. You're not constantly scanning for illnesses, but it's about how can we look out for each other and have that awareness, just to have that conversation and support people on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, very much so.
And you're an incredibly busy person. So, and you're very soon going to go into Diwali party season, but also education season. So what do you do to look after your own mental health?
Yeah, so I'm going to sort of slightly borrow from a friend, actually, who is also one of my heroes. You might have come across her, Poppy Jaman.
Yes, I do know Poppy, yeah.
Yeah, So she's just a force of nature. And so she runs the City Mental Health Alliance.
Yeah.
So one of the things that she talks about really resonated with me because it's kind of the way that I approach mental health as distinct from mental ill health, if you like. But I didn't have the words to describe it until she gave them to me. So she talks about two things. Firstly, she talks about recognizing your own stress signature. And what that is, what are the early warning signs, the early warning indicators that are personal and specific to me, but mean that I can recognize when my mental health is suffering and when I'm not doing so well. So, for me, it might be things like I'll start eating rubbish and junk and lots of it. I'll stop doing things like dancing. I won't go dancing. I won't listen to music. So I'll start just feeling really tired all the time and wanting to sleep. So some examples, but each of us will have certain things that, maybe someone will lock themselves in their room and play the violin all night, whatever it might be. Each of us has our personal things that can tell us that, there's issues here. So that's the first thing, your personal stress signature. And then the second thing that she talks about is your mental health toolbox, right? Which is all those things that either you do to maintain your good mental health, the same way as for your physical health, you might go to the gym a few times a week, or you might go for a run, or whatever it is that you do to stay in shape physically. Well, what's in your mental health toolbox? What's in your mental health gym bag? What is it that you can do that will always help your mental health? So knowing, again, what are those, that's the next thing that I think is really important for promoting other people's mental health, but especially for yourself. So I think all of that is really just about self-awareness, isn't it? So I think it's really important to take the time out and reflect and understand yourself and what are your triggers, what are your early warning indicators, and so on, and what are your factors that can help. And I suppose the final thing, which I'll admit is something that I'm still very much working on, is about recognizing when I need help and asking for it, because none of us is an island. None of us can do it all alone, right? But I think sometimes we can struggle to ask for help when we need it. So I think that's really important to know that you're not alone. There's always someone that you can call, and you need to recognize when you need to do that.
Yeah, it's so true. And I talk about that a lot, that actually it's a leadership skill, being able to ask for help. It's not weak, but we're all a work in progress on that one, aren't we?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
And I just want to say thank you so much, Manish, for all your time educating us about Diwali, talking about the work that you do with global majority BME communities, and then touching on mental health and mental ill health and well-being. And are you happy for people to connect with you personally on LinkedIn and Twitter? And I've included information on the Royal Navy in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do get in touch. As you say, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, so more than happy to be contacted there. And obviously, to learn more about the Royal Navy or get in touch, there's the Royal Navy website. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, the usual places. So people can follow us there, or just pop into the local Armed Forces Careers Office. The Defence Hindu Network is now on Twitter as well, as of just a couple of days ago.
Oh, brilliant.
So please do follow us there, and I'll send you the details of that afterwards, so that you can add those to the show notes, if that's okay.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. That was such a fantastic, rich conversation. We're so lucky to have you on the show. So no excuses, everyone. We want to see Diwali celebrated in your workplaces. And thank you so much. And November, we're going to be talking all about bullying and stress awareness. So we'll see you in the next episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.